Great. Well, on behalf of MITAC, the MIT Activities Committee, I want to welcome everybody today to the Intro to Bees talk with Mel Gadd, the beekeeper from Mass Audubon Drumlin Farm Wildlife Sanctuary. Mel has been a beekeeper for 16 years and knows a lot about bees, and he's going to teach us a bit about the history of beekeeping, bee biology, basics of beekeeping, and if you're interested in learning more about harvesting your own honey, Mel will touch on that as well. So without further ado, I will let Mel take us on the journey of beekeeping. Mel?
Okay, thank you, Diane. Welcome, everybody. Again, as Diane said, I've been a beekeeper for about 16 years. Have been running a beekeeping program at Mass Audubon's Drumlin Farm for probably the last 6 or 7 years. I've kind of lost track, where we now presently have 18 hives. And we do a lot of different types of beehives, which I'll talk a little bit about today. We do a lot of alternative beekeeping. We do a natural approach to beekeeping, no chemicals, because the farm is chemical free. I don't know how many of you know Mass Audubon's Drumlin Farm, but it's a working farm and animal sanctuary. They have a number of animals that are not able to be left back out in the wild because of some medical problem. So they have those on display, plus, again, it's a full working farm. It's over 220 roughly acres. And we also run a beekeeping school where we teach beekeeping to people, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. So I'll just get right into it. This is really just a kind of an intro. I don't know how much people know about bees. I think everybody knows how important honeybees and all the other pollinators are to our existence. Over 30 to 40% of the food we eat is totally dependent upon the pollinators, including the honeybees. Honeybees are the original immigrants to this country. They're not native to America. There are a lot of native bees. And one thing I wanted to mention is if anybody has any questions while I'm talking, you should just go onto your chat and they'll let me know, since it's easier if I answer them as we're going along versus at the end. So native bees in this country, there are over 5,000 different types of native bees. A lot of them are solitary. And honeybees were brought over by the Pilgrims, strangely enough. And the Native Americans, when they first encountered the bees, they called it the white man's fly, until they realized what positive things they did. Native bees are actually better pollinators than honeybees. But honeybees are the largest number of bees out there because beekeepers are able to manage them. Native bees aren't that easily managed, and their numbers are not anywhere near what honeybees are. Native bees in general pollinate at a rate of somewhere between 80 and 90%, where honeybees in general will pollinate somewhere around 65%. But again, they're the largest number of the bees out there, and they're able to be moved across the country. So that has created some problems, but we'll move on. So the first picture really shows a honeybee on a flower, and it's collecting the pollen as well as the nectar. Flowers produce nectar for one reason and one reason only, and that is to encourage the pollinators to come to them. Going the wrong way. So I usually start with this little piece. So I hope everybody enjoys it.
song of the bees, thousands as one, led by a queen. Bees by the thousands, they are working together, bringing nectar and pollen. Whatever the weather, I gotta keep the queen fed, laying 2 eggs a minute. For the next generation, the sky's the limit. Co-evolution we see, flowers and bees, nectar for fertile seeds. We pop off the top to inspect the brood. White larvae eggs mean that things are all good. We try to avoid the end with the stinger, but every now and then we still get stung on the finger, stung on the finger. Put some ice on that sting, cool down the bird, easing the suffering. Got Varroa and Nosema and now tracheal mites. It's a mess with all these pests, we might just give up the fight. But no disease will kill my bees, cause I take care of my hive. And through the winter into April they will still be alive. Still be alive, my bees are alive. Hauling in the honey like a beast, and then in August we'll collect it, and we'll have a great feast with lots of meat and pie and honeycomb and cookies too. And we'll still have enough to give honey to you, honey to you. Song of the bees, thousands as one, led by a queen. Co-evolution we see, flowers and bees, nectar for fertile seeds.
So I'll just make one comment about this. If you look at the picture that's on the screen right now, into the kind of bottom left, or my bottom left, you'll see a bee with a yellow mark on her. That's the queen. She's basically twice the size of the other bees, and we're going to talk about that. But the mark is put on there by whoever raised her, and there's a color coding system, and it lets the beekeeper know what year she was born. Queens will live up to 5 years, and some beekeepers like to replace their queens every 2 years to keep her production up. Some of us let the hive replace her when she gets old. We're a little more friendly to that. Okay. So,
Mel, that was an extraordinary video. Thank you for kicking us off in such a fun way. We had our first question, if we could just kick it off real quick.
sure.
What did you mean that some bees are solitary?
So honeybees are a social group. They live as a community in the hives, whether it's in a man-made hive or a feral hive out in the woods in a tree. Some bees are solitary. They live by themselves. Bumblebees live in the ground and make their nests. Usually they'll find old ant holes or something else, and they lay their egg there and then leave. It's not like they're working as a group. Bumblebees are, I call them the teddy bear of the bee world. Everybody, I think, has seen them. They're a little chubbier, they have a lot more hair, and they are native to this country. And they basically will live in the ground or in piles of leaves. all bees originally developed out of some kind of a wasp way back when. So, and in this picture, you'll see there's a wasp on the top right, there's a bumblebee and the honeybee. So hopefully that answered the question.
I think so. Thank you.
Okay. So again, if you look at the picture of the honeybee, you can see it has almost like a little straw or a stick sticking out of its face. That's called a proboscis. And it is like a straw, and that's what it sticks into the flower and pulls the nectar out. The nectar is what they convert into honey. The pollen they collect, and if you look on its legs, you can start to see some yellow, and that's because the pollen is collecting. Pollen is almost like baking flour. It's that small, but they group it together. And that gets turned into what we call bee bread, which becomes the bee's protein source. And the nectar gets converted into honey, which we all love, but it's the bee's carbohydrate source. Okay, so let's move on. And here's a much closer of a bumblebee that basically does the same thing, collects nectar and collects pollen. And why all the pollinators and insects that pollinate are important is because the pollen will stick from this flower onto the legs and the hairs of that bee. And when it goes to the next flower, some of it falls off and in effect inseminates that flower, so it'll turn into a fruit or vegetable or seeds for the following year. That's why they're so important. And again, without them, we'd be in a lot of trouble. So honeybees, 3 types of honeybees. The queen, which is the largest, only 1 queen in a hive. If you have more than 1 queen, they would find each other and fight to the death. She will live anywhere from 3 to 5 years. Again, some beekeepers like to replace their queens every 2 years to ensure that her production continues. Her whole purpose in life is to lay eggs. She could lay up to 2,000 eggs a day from basically end of January until late October. With climate change and our temperatures being warmer, she may probably started laying at the end of December this year, and at times will go into November. But again, only 1, and that's all she does. She does nothing else. She gets taken care of by the worker bees, who are all female. They feed her, they clean her, and basically take care of her. So she will go from cell to cell laying eggs, and that's all. The only time she goes out of the hive is when she goes on her original mating flight, where she will fly off and mate with drones. Beekeepers hope that she's mating with somewhere between 15 and 20 drones out there from all different hives, so that her diversity of sperm that she has will be large, which is healthier. She has sacs on both her sides where she collects the sperm, and she will collect enough sperm on that mating flight that will last her lifetime. Second one in the hive is called the drone, which is the lower right hand. Little fatter, rounder butt. This is the male bee, has 1 function and 1 function only, and that is to try and hook up with a queen and mate. There's no other function. In effect, the drones are considered lazy. They do no work in the hive. During the season when they're needed, the worker bees will feed them and clean them. And they will fly off and collect what I call, they collect somewhere 20 to 30 feet up in the air, probably above a tree. And I call it kind of the drone singles bar. And they hang out waiting for a queen to come flying by. And she releases what they call a pheromone, And that pheromone basically lets them know, hey guys, catch up with me, let's mate. 1% of the drones out there are lucky enough to mate with a queen. They have a few seconds of fun, so to speak. And then when they go to remove themselves from the queen, their privates are stuck in there and rips their internal organs apart and they die. But again, that's their only function. Come late September or October, when the hive is getting ready for winter, the worker bees kind of say, we have scarce resources. We don't need you guys during the winter. And you can stand in front of your hive and watch the worker bees push the drones out of the hive and not let them back in, and they die. And then come the spring, the queen will lay a certain number of drones to meet the needs of the overall bee community, so to speak. Drones are created by unfertilized eggs. Worker bees are created by fertilized eggs. Okay. Last but not least is the worker bee, which is the female. This is a totally female-dominated society. In a hive, at the height of the summer, the hive will have over 60,000 bees, and one queen, few hundred male bees or drones, and everybody else is a female. And they make all the decisions about the hive. They decide when the queen gets replaced, and whether or not they need to leave the hive for a new location. They do all the work, which there's a slide that'll go through that, what they do, kind of what they do. Okay. This is just a cross section of the internal structure of a hive. Honeybees have two stomachs, one they call a honey stomach and one which is a regular stomach, just like ours. The honey stomach is where they basically store the nectar. And it's mixed with enzymes that starts to break it down. Nectar is basically a compound sugar made up of a number of different types of sugar, and that helps to break it down, and it ends up primarily being either sucrose or fructose. And then they will then transfer that nectar that's mixed with the enzymes to another worker bee in the hive, who will store it into a cell, one of the honeycomb cells. And then they have to dehydrate it because that nectar mixture has a lot of moisture in it. And when it gets to below 17% or less moisture, it's then honey. And somehow the bees know that, and then they will cap that cell. So I can pull frames out of the hive and look at it, and if I see capped cells, that's honey. And if I see liquid that's not capped, I know it's not been dehydrated enough. Okay. There's one of the girls, and this just kind of goes through the different parts of the bee, the morphology of the bee: the head, the thorax, the abdomen, the wings. And the wings are basically, the bees have 4 wings, 2 on each side, and they hook the 2 on each side hooked together. And if you were to put it under a microscope, it almost, I don't know if anybody has looked under a microscope at Velcro, but it almost looks like a Velcro strip that they've connected with. And I don't know if the people who invented Velcro kind of studied a bee to see how they attach their wings so it works as one. There are 6 legs, and they have 2 antennae. One of the things I teach people is that the way you tell the difference between a honeybee or other bees and wasps and yellow jackets, and it's mostly yellow jackets because people confuse them, is all the honeybees and native bees have bent antennae, as you can see in this picture. Yellow jackets have straight antennae, and wasps and hornets. Because certain time of year, beekeepers who are on swarm lists will get calls saying, oh, I have a lot of bees trying to live under my deck or something. And usually you'll get these calls in the fall, and honeybees don't usually swarm that time of year. They swarm earlier in the year. And when I first started, I used to run out and say, oh, I'll come and get them, because we love to get free bees. And then we found I'd get there and realize it was yellow jackets. So I now have people send me a picture, and I say, if it's a straight antenna, it's a yellow jacket, and you can call an exterminator or buy something.
Mel, we have a question. I'm sorry for interrupting.
right.
About the queen, are they born queens or do they develop into queens from normal females?
Okay, they develop into queens. What happens is when the queen releases a pheromone very specific to her in the hive, and as her production and she ages, the level of that pheromone drops, it decreases. And when it gets below a certain point, the worker bees say, mom's getting too old, we got to replace her or we're going to be in trouble. And so what they do is they'll take eggs that the queen has laid within 48 hours, and they generally they're so smart that instead of just doing one egg to convert into a queen, they'll do anything from 5 to 10 cells. They'll increase the size of that cell because the queen is so much bigger. And I think there's a picture later on about that. They then feed those cells. Every egg gets a little bit of a hormonal substance that the bees produce that they will then put into those cells. The queen only gets that substance. And that helps her develop all of the organs she will need to be turned into a queen. But just like, unfortunately, sometimes pregnancies don't work, they don't take the risk of starting just one. They will start 5 to 10 to make sure they get at least one queen. And what happens is when that queen is born, queens in their cells make a sound that we call a piping sound. And the queen, the first one out, will seek out those other cells of queens and kill them. I know it sounds a little vicious, but that's the way Mother Nature set it up. And
Wow.
if two are born at the same time, they will find each other and fight to the death to see who's going to be the mom, in effect. Once she then flies off and gets mated and comes back, that new queen, the worker bees will find the old queen and smother her to death, which again sounds mean, but that's the way Mother Nature set it up. Okay.
Wow. And about yellow jackets or other non-honey bees, do they serve any other purpose? Would there be a reason not to call an exterminator?
No, they do pollinate. They don't pollinate as much. The way I describe it is honeybees and other native bees are vegetarians, but yellow jackets, wasps, and hornets are meat eaters. They also eat pollen, and they will eat the honey in the hive if they can get to it. But they also will eat meat. And anybody who's been on a picnic and gone near a garbage can where there's a lot of deli meat or other stuff, you'll see a lot of yellow jackets around. And they will sting you for no reason. Honeybees will only sting you to protect themselves or the hive. When my granddaughter was 3, she would stand in front of my hives and just watch the bees, and they wouldn't bother her. So she knew not to swat at them. A yellow jacket will sting you for no reason, and they can continuously sting you, where honeybees and other native bees only sting you once, because when they sting you, they die. But they are willing to sacrifice their life to protect the rest of the family, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this will bees in the hive. The large one in the middle of the screen is a queen. You look inside some of those honeycomb cells, you can see some larvae that are in there. The queen has her rear end sticking in a cell, and she goes from cell to cell laying eggs, and that she'll do that all day long. And again, she'll lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. Queens can live anywhere, again, from 2 to 5 years. Worker bees during the height of the season will only live 4 to 6 weeks. Over the winter, they'll live a couple of months. So you really need that queen to keep laying, to keep the numbers in the hive up so that it'll sustain the hive. Here's just a demonstration of the queen laying the egg. And if you look at the egg, it's not like a chicken egg. It looks like a very tiny little worm. It then turns into a larva. And then the larva develops into a pupa. And then it metamorphoses into a honeybee. And the time frame is roughly, for a worker bee, is roughly 24 days from the day she lays the egg to the day that worker bee chews its way out of the cell. At one point after the larva is developing and the worker bees, the nurse bees in the hive, have put some bee bread, which is the pollen, and some honey in for them to eat, they will seal that cell. And then again, when it's time for them to be born, they will chew their way out.
And the cells that eventually become the queen get fertilized, correct? Because they are the female?
She's already fertilized. She was fertilized. Again, female worker bees are fertilized eggs, so the queen
Right.
fertilizes them. Male bees, drones, are unfertilized eggs. Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
Right. This just runs through the different process. Again, here's the queen with the larger body. She doesn't have really large wings as the other bees because, again, she only goes out initially for her mating flight, and then the only other time is if the hive swarms, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Otherwise, she's totally in the hive. Okay. So this is a picture of a frame, and that large kind of nut-shaped cell structure is a queen cell. Again, because she's so much larger than the other bees, when they're creating a queen, they have to increase the size of the cell so she has something to develop in. Now, what's interesting about queen cells is where the queen cell is located on the frame tells the beekeepers what's going on in the hive. Okay, so if the queen cells are kind of in the middle or distributed around roughly in the middle of the frame, it means either queen's gotten old, it's time to replace her, or the queen is damaged and isn't doing her job, or the beekeeper made a mistake and dropped her when he was inspecting the hive and didn't realize it. And then the worker bees, luckily, will have figured out fairly quickly that mom's gone, and they will find eggs she had laid within 48 hours to start converting into a queen cell. Again, as she's in the hive, she's releasing this pheromone. If she's gone, there is no pheromone, and it lets all the bees know, uh-oh, we're in trouble. Because at some point, if they can't develop a queen, one of the worker bees might be able to start laying some eggs. But she can only lay male eggs because she has no ability to fertilize because she hasn't been mated and has no sperm stored in her body. And that would basically mean that the hive is going to die. So again, if I open my hive and pull the frame out and see these queen cells kind of in the middle or distributed within the frame, I know either mom's old or something's wrong, or the level of her pheromone. Sometimes you get a bad queen that hasn't really been mated well. And so that the level of her pheromone is low, and the bees say, this isn't going to help us in the long run. We got to create a new one. If you find the queen cells along the bottom of the frame, which is kind of to the right of this picture, that tells me that the hive is getting ready to swarm. And I think a lot of people have heard about swarming. And usually people, what you see is you'll see a cloud, a dark cloud, somewhere around 20 to 30,000 bees flying across the sky as a group. Swarming is actually a good thing, because what it means is your hive is doing really well and it's overcrowded. And so it's the bees' natural way of putting more bees out into the world. So 20 to 30,000 of the existing bees and the old queen will leave the hive and go look for a new place to live. And the worker bees in the hive will have started creating a new queen that once she is born and flies off on a mating flight and comes back, will then continue that hive. Now, some beekeepers don't like swarming, and they basically, if you keep ahead of them and give them enough room, they're not going to swarm. But if there's not enough room because they've produced so well, she's produced a lot of bees, and you haven't added more space for them to live, they will swarm. Now, I don't really care if my bees swarm, because from my viewpoint, it puts more bees out into the world. Beekeepers who really care about the level of their honey production do care about swarming, because it breaks the cycle of production, because there'll be a break period in effect from the time the swarm leaves and the new queen starts laying eggs and they're born. So they will be fanatic about making sure there's enough room. Some of us, I mean, I check my hive, but I don't worry if the hive swarms. Now, I like catching swarms because it's a free source of bees. Beekeepers tend to be cheap. When I first started, you can start a hive with what they call a package of bees, which is about the shape of the size of a shoebox. But it's wooden on 4 sides, and the 2 big sides have screens on it. And there are 3 pounds, you get a package of 3 pounds of bees with a queen. 3 pounds of bees is 10,000 bees. When I first started, I think we were paying $65 or $75 for a package. We're now paying close to $150. So like everything else, things have gone up.
We had an interesting question.
Sure.
About when you buy like a jar of honey and it comes with a piece of honeycomb in it often. If you eat the comb, is there a chance that you might be eating a bee egg or a pupa?
It's possible. Generally, there are a lot of different ways beekeepers will stop the bees, the queen, from going up into where honey boxes where you're storing the honey. They also will filter stuff. So with honeycomb, generally they're taking honeycomb from what they call a honey box, where the queen has not been able to get into it. Now, even if there is a larva or a pupa there, it's protein. It's not going to hurt you. Beeswax, the honeycomb itself is all natural, that bees produce it, and you can eat it and it's not going to really bother you. Some people love eating it. I like chewing it like gum, and once the honey is out, I'll throw the wax away. But so this is a swarm. Generally, when bees swarm, they will fly roughly 100 yards away from the hive, and they will land on a tree, on a mailbox. In New York City 2 years ago, a swarm landed on one of the hot dog carts. And what they do is they then send out scouts that I call the real estate bees. They send them out to find a new place for the bees to live. And then they'll come back and they go through a whole decision-making process. And once they decide on where they're going to go, they will leave en masse. Now, when they swarm, people think, oh, they're really dangerous. And it's actually the reverse, because basically they have engorged themselves with honey and pollen because they know they're going to need a lot of energy to create new housekeeping when they set up a new house. So it's kind of like us on Thanksgiving when we've eaten too much. Their stomachs are so full that their stinger can't come out. So they're much more gentle. I have often caught swarms without having any protective clothing on and haven't worried about it. So again, it's an overcrowding issue. It's a housing issue. You know, when they're overcrowded, they will leave or partially leave and find a new place. And that's basically what all of this talks about. Again, there's the drone, bigger than the worker bees, the lazy one. And again, its whole purpose is going off and finding a queen and hooking up. But they will die once they have finished with the queen. A few seconds of fun. It's kind of like praying mantises. When a male and a female praying mantis mate, after they have mated, the female praying mantis bites the male's head off, kind of like wants to hide the evidence or something.
Mel, we have one more question. Are there many different varieties of the honeybee?
Honey, we don't call them variety, we call them races. So there are Italian bees, which are, most bees in this country are Italian. There are Russian. There are what they call buckfast, which was developed by a monk in England years ago. There are carnelian bees, which come from kind of Northern Europe. There are hybrids that people have been basically breeding to make them more resistant to certain diseases that the bees get. There's something now called a virohygienic sensitive bee that some researchers have developed that are more resistant to this thing called a vero mite, which is one of the bigger problems bees have and we have with them. And each of these different races have some different characteristics. And then there's the Africanized bee, or as some people call them, killer bees, which is not really fair. They're just much more aggressive. They were brought into South America from Africa a long number of years ago, but they have slowly worked their way up into the States. And the last I heard, they were as far up as Georgia and South Carolina. Some of my friends who are beekeepers think they'll never come up here because it's too cold. Some of us say that's not going to be the case because they adapt very well. And it just means beekeepers have to use different management techniques and be a little more careful. Now, have Africanized bees killed people? Sure, but those people have been stung and attacked by over 100 or more bees, and the venom has kind of unfortunately done them in. Hopefully it won't be a problem, but you know, we never know. So if you look in these cells, you can see the little white dot in the middle is the egg, and these are nurse bees kind of putting food in there and just keeping them safe. Honeycomb is a natural beeswax that the bees make, that they secrete from cells along their stomach, and then they shape it into the hexagon shape. Hexagons is the shape that's used because it's the most efficient shape for the bees to make. It uses the least amount of beeswax, and it has no wasted space. So if you put everybody says, well, why don't they do circle? Well, if you put circles together in this kind of pattern, they're going to be small wasted spaces. With the hexagon, they share walls with other cells, so they're not don't need to create as much wax, and it's 100% useful. It's kind of amazing, and later on there'll be a little video that shows you bees developing and building it out. Okay, let's move along. Here's a bee on a flower. Again, it's proboscis, which is kind of like its tongue goes into the flower. If you look on the back leg, which is called a pollen basket, where the bee kind of pushes all those pollen together and makes a pellet. Again, you know, that's the importance of the bees, is they're pollinating. This one, you could really see the tongue sticking into the flower. And again, the nectar is the only purpose for the nectar. It has no usefulness to the flowers, is to attract the bees and other pollinators to it. And if you look on that bee, you can see a much larger pollen pellet. Now, different flowers create different color pollens. And when they store it, they mix it with a little honey and nectar, and they store it in the cells, and it turns into bee bread, which is their protein. Some beekeepers can pull a frame out and look at the color of the pollen and tell you exactly what flowers that pollen came from. I unfortunately can't do that because I am extremely colorblind, so I don't even attempt, as long as they're collecting it. And so on the right hand, you can see that huge pollen pellet that it's created. And again, that becomes the bee's protein source. Just like we need protein, they need protein. And the honey becomes their carbohydrate source. And the only other thing that they need that we need is water. And they use the water for their bodies, and they use the water for cooling the hive. So I'm just gonna bring this up. Bee stings. Most people blame honeybees for bee stings, even though most people who are stung by yellow jackets, hornets, or wasps. Honeybees will only sting you if they threaten you. If you threaten them, I'm sorry. They're not aggressive unless they're in a protection mode. Any beekeeper that tells you they've never been stung is full of it. It's the bee's way of letting me know, hey, Mel, you're doing it wrong, get it together. On the lower right bottom portion of the slide, you can see the stinger, and that's internal. That round part is its venom sac. When a bee stings you, that stinger has little barbs on the end of its stinger, and when it goes to pull its stinger out, which comes out of its butt, it can't, because those barbs hold it in, and it rips their insides out. So again, they don't want to sting you because they don't want to die, but they will to protect everybody else. The important thing to know about the stinger is if you go to remove it, the natural thing that people do is they will grab their fingers like tweezers and grab that stinger and pull it out. The problem with doing it that way is that stinger is like a doctor's needle. It's full of the venom. And if you use your fingers like a tweezer, all you're doing is pushing all that venom into you. So you need to take a credit card or a key, something hard that's flat, and put it against the base where it goes into you and push it out so you're not squeezing it. 1% of the population is seriously allergic to bee venom. Most people who know it. If you don't know it and you happen to get stung by a bee or other insect and you start to have breathing problems, you need to get to the hospital. People who know they're allergic carry EpiPens with them, and they'll inject, because what happens is that venom causes your throat to close down. And the EpiPen helps to open it up to give you time to get to the hospital. Again, 1% of the people are seriously allergic. Is it going to hurt when they sting you? Yeah, it's going to hurt. And sometimes it'll swell up a little bit. Sometimes it swells up a lot. It's important to get away from where you were stung, because that bee that stung you releases another pheromone called an alarm pheromone. And it's that bee's way of letting everybody else know, all the other bees know, this fat guy's a problem, go get him. So you've all seen cartoons of people running down the street with bees coming after them. And that's because they've gotten stung and that bee released that pheromone. So it's important to use something to mask over that sting, like ice, to get that smell away. Beekeepers who are using a smoker, which we'll talk about in a little bit, will puff smoke on it to dissipate that pheromone smell. I recommend that people take an antihistamine to stop the swelling. The swelling for me isn't as bad as the itching. That venom causes you to really itch, and that antihistamine will help dissipate that problem. Okay. But again, honeybees in general will not sting unless you threaten them. And when I go into the hive, sometimes if I'm not careful, it threatens them, so they'll let me know. I usually get asked, how often do I get stung? During the season, I probably get stung every other week. But luckily, I seem to have gotten more resistant to the stings as time has gone on, where some people end up getting more allergic. The only thing that I want to protect from getting stung is my face. I got stung right near my eye once, and it swelled up so much I could barely see for a few days out of that eye. So I will wear a jacket with a hood on it. I used to wear gloves. It's harder to work with the gloves for me. And if I get stung as it showed in the video, yeah, you get stung on the finger and it hurts a little bit, but it goes away. And at this stage, I almost don't feel it. It's probably a bad thing, but who knows? Okay, this is a typical Langstroth hive. Most beekeepers in this country use Langstroths. So each box has frames in it that are removable. I do a variety of different types of hives. I do Langstroths. I also have something called a Wari hive, which is a more natural approach to beekeeping, where it's just a bar that the bees will build their own comb from scratch. In these, with the frame, there's a sheet of beeswax that someone has imprinted with the hexagon, and the bees build it out. The Wari hive replicates what they do in the wild. So on the Langstroth, what you're looking at, when you need more space, you add it to the top. But every time you open that hive, you break that heat sink in the hive. In the summer, it's not an issue. Come the early spring, every time you open it up, you're dissipating the heat that they've generated. And usually by mid-January, they will have generated 90-degree temperatures in the hive, which is what the queen needs to be able to lay her eggs and for them to develop. We also have, these are just different flowers that the bees get attracted to. I'm going to run through these a little quicker. Okay, so what this little cartoony drawing shows is all the different jobs that every worker bee does in the hive, okay? So it's not like some bees are nurse bees, some bees are guard bees, or some bees are foraging bees. Each worker bee, from the day they're born till the day they die, as they age, moves on to the next job, okay? So when they're first born, so if you look at the bottom of the cross section of the cells, the egg is laid, and And then the bee develops and it's born. When it first comes out, it becomes a cleaning bee. It ends up cleaning the cells so that the queen has a place to lay an egg, becomes a nurse bee. It takes care of the other bees, and it becomes a nurse bee taking care of the new bees and the queen. And then as they age, they move on to the next job. When bees who are out foraging bring in nectar and honey and nectar and pollen, they're not able to remove that pollen themselves. So one of the worker bees in the hive will take that pollen off of that foraging bee, who then goes back out and puts it into the cell. They do the same thing with the pollen, and then they'll become basically a guard bee at the entrance of the hive to not let other insects into the hive. Or sometimes a lot of beekeepers will have hives right next to each other. And sometimes a bee will drift from one hive to another. And if that guard bee doesn't smell the pheromone that is in that hive, that queen has laid and specific to her, they will then proceed to not let that bee in. They also won't let yellow jackets or others in. So this is a typical Langstroth with that's healthy, that you can see there are a lot of bees on the frames. And here they are working away. If you look closely at the picture, you can see the larva that's been developed. Worker bees do have a stinger, so they can sting. A drone, the male bee, which is on the bottom part, does not have a stinger, so it can't sting you. Again, here's the bee working on a flower. And as I said to you before, sometimes when you pull a frame, if you look inside those cells, those are basically the bee bread, the pollen that's been stored. And again, some beekeepers can look at that and tell you what flowers they came from. I wish I could, but I can't. And again, those are just more larvae that are developing. This is nectar inside that's being converted, and they will dehydrate that by flapping their wings and getting some of the water out. And when that nectar has less than 17% moisture in it, they cap it. So if you look at the top part, you can see there's white cappings of beeswax on those capped cells because they're less than 17%. It amazes me that they are able to tell that, because I have tested the honey we've taken from closed cells, and I've tested nectar that's still in open cells. And the nectar, the honey in the capped cells is always less than 17% moisture. The ones in open cells are always more than 17%. So it's like there's a little scientist bee running around with a refractometer measuring. They just instinctively know. These are just the bees coming in and out. As I said, hornets and gut wasps and yellow jackets at certain times a year when there's nothing else out there, they will try and get into your hive. And if your hive is not strong, the bees aren't going to be able to fight them off. This hive happens to be strong, and they're attacking that yellow jacket and killing it. We did a pollinator festival out at Drumlin Farm the first year we did it, and we did it in the late fall. And I went to do a hive opening with about 30 people standing around, and it had been one of our strongest hives, but the numbers in the hive had dropped, and we didn't realize that the yellow jackets were kind of, because of climate change. In New England, we used to get a hard frost in sometime in early or mid-September, and then it would warm up again, but that hard frost would kill off the wasp and yellow jackets. Well, we generally now don't get a hard frost until early November. And so that the yellow jacket and wasp populations explode in the fall now. And because there's no flowers and stuff out there, they come after the bees. And if the bees aren't strong enough, you could potentially lose your hive. So we now had to develop ways of basically stopping the yellow jackets getting into your hive. Again, bees on the flowers. Running a little late, so I'm going to move through these. So these are hives out in a field. Based on some more recent research done by a guy at Cornell, I no longer recommend keeping your hives closer together. I think hives do much better when they're spread out. He did a lot of research on feral bees in the woods, and that unfortunately unmanaged bees like that seem to do better than ours. But when you keep your hives closer together, if one hive gets sick from one of the diseases out there, it's going to easily spread to the others. So I now recommend people to move their hives apart and spread them out more. Again, here's someone's doing an inspection, just checking to make sure what they're doing and if they're doing fine. There's a beekeeper with gloves and a hood on. Again, I generally only use the hood. That's a very healthy hive with a lot of bees. Now, some beekeepers will use a smoker where they take a tin can, they'll start a fire inside of it with something, and they'll put something in there that'll create a lot of smoke. When they go to do an inspection on their hive, they puff smoke into the hive, and it makes the bees think, oh my God, there's a fire in the woods. We got to pack up and leave. So they start engorging themselves with honey and pollen because they think they're going to have to leave. And so the beekeeper can then go into the hive and do an inspection because they're so focused on leaving that they ignore you. I hate using smoke. I only use smoke when the weather isn't great, or I walk around with a stethoscope. I listen to the hive. If they sound really upset, I'll use smoke. If they sound more gentle and calmer, I use a spray bottle filled with honey water and a mushroom tea that I use that helps with their health. And so I spray them as I'm going in, and again, they're so sanitary that they'll spend time cleaning each other in the hive and let me do what I need to do. And you can see he's got a metal tool there, a hive tool, and he needs, or she needs that tool. Bees collect a resin from trees that's called propolis. Propolis is an antibiotic material that they coat everything in the hive, all the walls in the hive, and they will, it's almost like a glue. They will seal their frames in, so that you need that metal too to be able to pry out the frames to be able to look. Again, very healthy hive with a lot of bees. This just goes through about how you add a queen, because when you get these packages of bees, the guys who put together these packages have thousands of hives, and they just run down along the hives and dump 3 pounds of bees in, and they'll put a separate queen in. But that queen is not those bees' mother. And so you have to introduce her slowly to the hive. And if you don't, they will kill her. So if you put it in a cage hanging in the hive, or when you add it to the hive itself, you slowly introduce her, and they get used to her and then won't kill her. These are just treating for some of the diseases. Our biggest problem up here is with something called a viral mite. And the other thing is chemicals. Chemicals out in the fields. A lot of the farmers use a lot of chemicals. People on their gardens use a lot of chemicals, and it's just killing the bees. It weakens their stamina and opens them up to more problems. Viral mites are the biggest problem we have now. It's like a tick, and they attach themselves to the bee and they suck their fat, but they're at the same time injecting viruses. Some people use these chemicals to treat their bees. I tend not to use chemicals. I use natural approaches. Excuse me. I've done a lot of research based on some research that's been done out there using a mushroom tea that I brew, that I feed the bees, and that helps to reduce the viral loads in the bees drastically. And I've had a lot of success controlling my mite problem. If you look on the back of the bee towards the top, you see a little bug. It looks like a tick. That's a mite. So that's one of the problems that beekeepers have to deal with, and there are different ways. Excuse me. Here's someone collecting who wants to capture the honey. So you can see all the white parts of the cappings. He's scraping, or she's scraping the cappings off. They will then place it into a spinner that throws off the honey. It's kind of like these lettuce spinners that you put your wet lettuce in and you twirl it and it throws the water off. Basically, you're throwing the honey off and it drips down and collects at the bottom. And then you filter out any of the stuff that might have been in it, like dead bees or larvae or wax, and then you bottle it. Okay. And I'm just going to play this last piece. So I think everybody knows that was the flight of the bumblebee, and those were honeybees building out comb in what they call a top bar hive. So that's all natural comb, but you can see how cooperatively they all work together. Oops. That's what. And the last thing I want to say is, if there are any people who are really interested in learning how to actually keep bees, out at Drumlin, we run, or Mass Audubon sponsors and runs, a 5-week beekeeping school where we'll meet every Tuesday night for 5 weeks for 2 hours. And by the end of the program, you will know how to keep bees. And we run a mentor program where we mentor people to help them. We used to do this actually, meeting and live, and then we would do a field day where people would actually come out to the field. With the pandemic right now, we're doing it online. Hopefully that will change next year. And we're hopeful that late summer, early fall, when things hopefully are better, we can do some field classes. But we'll do a lot of teaching about getting you, from day one to getting your bees and putting your bees in. So hopefully I gave you some information. And if we have any questions.
That has been a fantastic talk, and I love that ending video. It was absolutely mesmerizing. We have a lot of thank yous coming in through the chat. Just a reminder to everyone who has to leave that the video or the presentation has been recorded, and we'll put that up on our MyTech YouTube channel so you can watch it at a later time. In the meantime, Mel, somebody asked, do you use a particular mushroom tea, and do you spray or feed the tea to them for medicinal purposes?
So I use reishi mushrooms. Originally, this is based on some research done by a guy named Paul Stamets, who is the godfather of mushrooms. He had walked in his backyard one day and found bees all over a bunch of mushrooms and fungus that he had in the yard that had water on it, and they were sucking up the mixture. So he hooked up with an entomologist, and they started researching what the effects were. And it turned out that mushroom tea was helping reduce viral loads in the bees' stomachs to 0. So I started experimenting with it, and now I feed all our hives. So in the early season, in the early spring, when there's not a lot of flowers out there, most beekeepers will start to feed their bees sugar water. I tend to try and not use sugar water. I use honey water. I always keep honey that we've collected, and I'll mix it with water and put it into the hive for them to eat. But I also put in some of this mushroom tea. When I go into the hive and not using smoke, I spray them with this mushroom tea honey mixture. And so that I know they're ingesting it. And we've had our bees tested, and our viral loads have been almost 0. And I haven't had as much of a mite problem as some other beekeepers have with who are using some of the chemicals out there that are produced. We also use rhubarb leaves. Rhubarb leaves are poisonous because they have 5 to 10% uric acid in them. And you know, when you go to buy rhubarb, the leaves are not there because they cut them off because they're poisonous. And I basically take the leaves and lay them on top of the frames in the hive. Because bees are so sanitary, they chew through those leaves, releasing the oxalic acid. And they chew through it to remove it out of the hive, because within a day or two, if I go back in the hive, those leaves are gone. But they've released that oxalic acid, which is knocking off the mites. So I've had a lot of luck using these natural approaches.
That's great. Very interesting. And just a reminder to everyone still sticking with us, you can feel free to write any last questions right in the chat, and I'll read them out for you. We also included a link to our survey, so you can let us know if you liked this sort of talk. We can definitely get back in touch with Mel and try to do another one in the future. And my colleague Anthony included the link to Mel's class if you'd like to check that out. We have a question. Have you lost any hives this winter?
So far, out of the 18, I've lost 4. 2 of them I lost before the winter, and 2 of them I lost that appear to have lost over the winter. I have a little, they call a FLIR, F-L-I-R, heat-sensitive camera, so I can take pictures of my hives. And because they generate 90-degree temperatures, I can just go take a picture of the hive without opening it because it's too cold, and tell whether or not the hive is alive. One of the hives I lost because it earlier in the late summer, when we had one of those storms, it got blown over. We had a microburst out at the farm, and I think basically the queen got damaged, and they were able to reproduce her, so that hive died off. The worst time of year for beekeepers is basically February and March. That's when most losses occur. So we'll see. Hopefully we will not have lost that much. We've been averaging somewhere around 25%. the New England average has been 60%. So we've done fairly well, thankfully.
Well, our fingers are crossed for you for the next couple months to hang in there. Does taking the honey hurt the hive?
No, we basically, the average hive can produce over 200 pounds of honey. It used to be that we told people to leave 60 to 80 pounds in the hive for the bees to make it through the winter, and we take the surplus. As when I teach kids, they say, "You mean you steal their food?" Well, they kind of share it with us. Now, because of climate change, I now tell people to leave 100 pounds. So we're pulling roughly 100 pounds out of the hives. And it doesn't seem to hurt them because we leave a lot. In some of the hives, I don't even take the honey until the spring, once I know they've made it through the winter.
Interesting. How far do bees travel from the hive?
They will fly up to 5 miles if they need to, but they're only going to go as far as they need to. So if there's flowers right in front of them, that's where they're going first. It's not like, they all go off in different directions. I used to have hives in my house when I lived in Cambridge in the yard, and we had a peach tree and raspberry bushes. So the bees would hit the peach tree first, clean it out, and then they would move on to the raspberries. So they'll go from one crop to the next crop, but they'll go up to 5 miles.
Got it.
But obviously, the further they go, the more of the nectar that they collect, that they'll use as fuel to get back.
And my colleague Diane just included a link. She says that the bees at the Museum of Science are fascinating to watch.
There's also an observation hive at the Harvard Natural History Museum, if people wanted to see. We have a big 4-frame high, 2-frame deep observation hive out at Drumlin. Unfortunately, it's in one of the buildings, but unfortunately during the pandemic it's been closed. But hopefully that will change eventually.
Yes, hope so. All right, well, that seems to be all of our questions in the chat. So we just want to thank you again, Mel, for your time today. This has been so fascinating. I was definitely starting at ground zero in terms of bee knowledge, and now I feel like I could go out and spot a queen. So thank you so much.
And if anybody has any questions, you can just email me.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you again so much, Mel, for such a fascinating talk. It was absolutely mesmerizing and learned so much. So thank you for sharing your bee knowledge with the MIT community today.
Okay, take care and be safe.